Look, I am sick of leaders who prefer, presumably for political advantage, to frighten rather than inform. And Gladys, I'm sorry, you're the high priestess of all of this. The stories of the elderly who should have been looked after from day one are dreadful. We learn now that Daniel Andrews' Department of Health and Human Services has refused to hospitalise COVID-infected aged care residents. Why? Well, they might wander and infect others. So what does the Victorian Department of Health do? It sedates some of them with all sorts of drugs, including morphine. This is a red-hot health system, isn't it? I don't think. Aren't they called residential aged care homes? They're homes, not medical facilities or acute hospitals, to deal with a virus that targets the elderly and the vulnerable. Is there any voice out of Canberra to criticise rightly the failure to give these people a hospital bed? Sedate them instead? Oh, but don't criticise Daniel Andrews. Didn't the Prime Minister tell his Liberal colleagues at the Federal Executive of the Liberal Party at the weekend not to criticise Andrews? He's doing his best. Really? Even when he can't get his facts right. Remember Daniel Andrews said he wasn't offered hundreds of soldiers by the Commonwealth to guard the hotel quarantine. Now, that demonstrates his complete ignorance. No one in the Commonwealth will offer a soldier to a state government. They have to ask, make formal requests to the government. So he doesn't know what he's talking about. However, he said, no, there weren't any Commonwealth soldiers. That's probably, I also might add, unconstitutional. That's another story. We've got police to do that job. But Mr Andrews told a state parliamentary committee on Tuesday it was incorrect to say there were hundreds of ADF staff offered to him. Offered. Rubbish. But the Defence Minister, Linda Reynolds, has responded explicitly to say Victoria was offered help with the hotel quarantine program on multiple occasions. No wonder Andrews doesn't want questions or Parliament to convene. He's simply lost control of the situation. I'm sorry, Daniel Andrews is the Joe Biden of Victorian politics. There are cognitive deficiencies. Well, how could such a person be removed? There is a provision which operates in 19 states of America, in the Canadian province of British Columbia, in parts of Switzerland and Germany, Bolivia, Venezuela, Japan, Taiwan and the Philippines. It's called a recall provision. It's quite simple. A recall provision can be exercised so that an unpopular government can be terminated. It's basically a citizens-initiated election. One of the best-known cases of a successful recall was in 2003, when voters removed the Governor of California, Gray Davis, and elected Arnold Schwarzenegger. Professor David Flint is full bottle on this. Indeed, in March 2009, in New South Wales, Barry O'Farrell, the then opposition leader, announced he would appoint a panel of constitutional experts to look at introducing a recall provision in New South Wales. But Barry became Premier, I suppose terrified that he might be recalled. The proposal hit the bin. Professor David Flint joins us. Professor Flint, good evening. Thank you for your time. Sadly, such a provision doesn't exist in Victoria.
It is most unfortunate. The only check in Victoria is really a vote of no confidence in the lower house, and that would require a split in the Labor Party. The last time that happened was in 1955. There used to be the right in the Legislative Council until 2003 to reject supply, force a government to an election. But that was taken away because the politicians realised it had been very effective in getting rid of a very delinquent government in 1975. So they all came together and they pushed through a change in the Victorian Constitution to remove that provision. But I think a right of recall should be part of a general review of the Constitution so that the politicians are far more accountable to the people.
Absolutely. And these mechanisms have operated in America and other countries, haven't they? I mean, an unpopular government can be terminated. What is wrong, Professor Flint, with a citizens-initiated election?
Well, we're told, and the High Court tells us, that the people are sovereign and the people have to be consulted in relation to a change in the Constitution. Unfortunately, the people can't initiate that, but that's another change which should be made. We have a representative democracy, but it has been captured by the two principal parties, captured over and above their memberships, so that both parties are now mainly controlled by small cabals of power brokers who are very instrumental in ensuring in pre-selections that not the person with merit is chosen. Usually it is the person who is in allegiance with the most powerful power broker.
Absolutely.
And we get the result that we see today.
Just to explain to our viewers here, what this means is that a percentage, and it varies depending on which state is implementing the recall provision, but a percentage of the people who voted at the previous election, that has to be verified, can then sign a petition for the recall of the government that they elected. So there then would be fresh elections, and that's what happened in California. The signatures have to be verified. The percentage of voters is not insignificant, sometimes 12, sometimes 13, sometimes 14. Just a quick one while I've got you here, Professor Flint. The abuse of the Constitution, closed borders, the things I was talking to Catherine McGregor about. I mean, everywhere you turn, liberties are being taken away. The Constitution's just being ripped up.
It is indeed, and so is the law. Most of the actions that they're taking, they come to a consensus in this bizarre thing called the National Cabinet, which is really the old Premier's Conference, where they meet together informally. It has no authority in itself. Most of the decisions are then enforced by the ministers going back. And the ministers themselves are making subordinate legislation. It's not even subordinate legislation under an Act of Parliament, which then goes to the Executive Council and the Governor has a chance of seeing it. It's done by the minister themselves. Many of them have gone far beyond. They're disproportionate. And I think the case that we ought to all remember is the one relating to the cattle ban. Remember the cattle ban, which the Gillard government applied? They banned all cattle exported to Indonesia, whether or not they were going to a good abattoir or not. That was found to be disproportionate because it exceeded the power which was given in the statute. I have no doubt that there will be a mass of actions in relation to misfeasance in public office by various ministers in Australia. Unfortunately, it'll take years. Unfortunately, it'll be the taxpayers who pay. We should have an offence, a criminal offence of serious misfeasance in public office, and ministers should pay for such things that they do. They should not abuse their powers, as they obviously are in many of the states. And they're doing this so capriciously, telling us how many people can be in a church and how many people can be in a mosque on a special occasion. They're double standards. We saw that in relation to the first BLM processions. Remember, they all said, oh, we've got to allow a right of protest. And the avalanche of objections by people who'd been only allowed to have 5 people at a funeral of their relative were absolutely astounded that a communist-led procession should be treated separately and differently.
Absolutely. Hey, it's wonderful to talk to you. I didn't have time, but I'll put a smile on your face. I was going to ask you about Tim Flannery, who said it'll never rain again and the dams will never be full of water, but that will... I knew he'd laugh. That will stay for another day. Good to talk to you, Professor David Flint.